This is Woman Being, and I'm here with Emma and Kelly Ann, and I'm Kelly. And today we are set out to answer the question, why are women afraid? And before we get started, I just want to put out a brief trigger warning. We are going to be discussing things such as assault and rape and sexual misconduct and all sorts of things like that. So just be aware, and we'll talk to you soon. This is Woman Being,
where we explore thoughts and opinions
and have the freedom to change our minds.
Without expectation or judgment,
we will hold a safe space and support each other
as we navigate together in the form of feminine.
As we get started, I just want to remind the woman beings listening today that you can follow us on social media. We are on Instagram at Woman Being Podcast. And if you want to engage more with the conversations that we're having, we post sound bites and quotes, and we ask questions on our Instagram story. And we have all sorts of ways for you to engage with us. So follow us on Instagram. You can also find us on our website at womanbeingcommunity.com. And lastly, just a quick plug for the review section of Apple Podcasts. If you could take the time, leave us a review, that would be amazingly helpful. So anyways, Let's dive into this conversation today. This is kind of brought on by a lot of different things happening in the world and in our own lives that we decided to have this discussion, which is, why are women afraid? And I think that there's a lot of conversation happening in this world about sexual assaults and mugging and kidnappings, and it feels like women are often victims of very serious crimes, and so there's conversations around women hold keys between their fingers as they walk to their car at night, and we take precautions that most people, or men I should say, don't usually have to take when they're walking in the street at night downtown, or heading to their car, or walking down a back alley. So I guess I wanted to kick this off just by asking you ladies, have you experienced fear because you are a woman? And if so, what are your earliest memories, or what are some of the strongest memories in your mind of that kind of starting?
Yeah. I mean, I would definitely say I experienced fear as a woman. I grew up in a very poor area of Oklahoma City. It was a very diverse area, and there definitely was this, you're a young girl. I'm the oldest of 4 girls, and all of us, being from a very young age, are just hey, you don't play outside by yourself. You don't walk around the block because, we have drug houses, and we have, there were shootings pretty frequently in our neighborhood. And so that's not something, particularly because we were young girls, that we wouldn't do, that are normal childhood things. I would say I've always kind of been aware, but that I was treated differently because I was a girl. But I think one memory that sticks out in particular was when I was actually a little older. I think it was around 18. I was working at a fireworks stand over the summer, and there was this boy whom I've known from a very, very young age. Our families were basically raised together, and he's kind of he had a crush on me, and he decided it was appropriate to follow me around and take pictures of me without my consent. As we were working at a fireworks stand together. And I asked him repeatedly. I was actually dating my husband at this point. He was my boyfriend. And I asked him repeatedly, please stop. You're making me very uncomfortable. And he seemed to not care. And that was the first moment I felt true powerlessness because of being a woman. There are some other instances, but that one in particular, because it's someone I've known for a very long time and didn't seem to care that I had the request to say, you don't have my consent for this. So that's something that really sticks out to me personally.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I grew up in very suburban, Southern culture. And so there wasn't a ton of fear around where I lived or things like that. But I definitely my mom instilled like fears into me just because of being a woman, and also because my mom is overprotective. Sorry, Mom, if you're listening, but you are. But I one thing that I remember, which like I look back on this and think about it, and I'm like, this was so silly, but I felt fear around this because of being a young girl, which was when I was working on getting my driver's license. You have to do like, hours of driving with the driving instructor.
I think it's 40 hours.
Yeah.
Something.
And so I was driving with my driving instructor, and he was like a middle-aged man. He was perfectly nice. And he said, "Oh, do you want to stop over at this like ice cream place, and we can grab ice cream like while we're like, and I'll count it as part of your hours, basically." And I was like, no, I'm fine. Because my first thought and like my first instinct was, this man's going to try to like do something to me because I'm going to be alone. And like before that, I didn't have tons of opportunities to like be alone because I was not an independent person. I couldn't drive myself places, like I was 15. And so I remember instantly saying no. Like that was my gut reaction. It was purely because I was a young girl and this was a man that I was with. If the driving instructor was a woman, I probably would have said yes. And I remember I had a friend who had the same exact driving instructor, and she told me at school like that next week, like, "Oh yeah, like I went on my driving instruction and like we went and got French fries and it was so fun and da-da-da." And I was like, dang it, I could have gotten free ice cream and I didn't because I was afraid. And like it feels like so harmless, and like you look back at it and I feel like almost kick yourself for it because you're like, that was irrational, but like what if it wasn't?
But was it,
Yeah. So that's like one of the earlier things that I remember, but I feel like I started becoming more and more aware of like needing to take certain precautions because of being a woman as I gained more independence, like as you're away from your family. And especially once I went to college, I moved to Philadelphia, like I was all of a sudden in a big city and was navigating like, okay, how do I like walk down the street and feel safe? Like, how do I walk around at night and feel safe? Like, what do either you make sure you have friends with you, or you call someone on the phone so that you are showing people like, hey, someone will know if I get attacked. Or you walk around honing in your resting bitch face so that then people don't mess with you. And so there's definitely like that became more and more cognizant as I got older, for sure.
Yeah, no, those are good, you guys. Thanks for sharing. I mean, I think like you both, and like many women, we've all kind of been instilled with this awareness that like, well, first of all, just stranger danger.
Yeah.
But then like on top of that, sort of the added threat of like someone having ill intentions who in theory could be a trusted person, like a driving instructor or a teacher or something, and suddenly being in a position where you feel like you're alone with them or something like that is happening and you don't know how to like respond.
Yeah.
I think I kind of grew up with that awareness. I think the first time that it really like something happened where I felt like super afraid was in youth group, actually. There was an 18-year-old young man who kept hitting on all the girls. And he particularly would hit on my friend, who's a couple years younger than him, several years older than me. And then she would just like, she'd be like, nope, don't want to talk to you. And she'd like walk away. And I was like trying to be the nice, good Christian girl and ended up talking to him for a while. And then suddenly he was like, I think I have a crush on you. And I was like, okay, I have to go. And I went to the other side of the church. Like I like left the sanctuary and went to the other side, and he came over. And I'm like 13, 12.
Yeah, you're literally a child.
Yeah, I was literally a child. And
he's 18.
Yes.
Wow.
He sat next to me, and he had some developmental delay and mental disabilities. So developmentally he was younger, but he came over and he's very big. He sat next to me and like put his hand on my leg and was like asking me if I would be his girlfriend. And I was like, I was sitting next to a friend and just like hiding and not saying anything, and I was scared. And there was other like friends of mine around him that were telling him to leave me alone, and he like wasn't leaving me alone. And I don't remember what happened, but eventually he like left or something. Someone removed him from the situation.
Yeah.
And I remember just sobbing for the rest of the night. Like, I think my mom happened to be there, or maybe someone called her. I don't remember exactly what happened, but I just, like, sat in the back of the sanctuary, like, and just sobbed in her arms because, like, I don't know, it was like, I definitely froze, didn't know what was going on, and he was so big and so, like, I didn't know how to say no, but I also didn't want the attention, and he was very much, like, bigger than me and not necessarily aware of what he was doing. And so that was, like, one of the first experiences I've had where I realized, like, oh, this is legit. Like, this could happen. And then beyond that, I would totally agree, like, becoming an adult and being more independent and getting out of my parents' home, leaving my small town. Like, I used to, like, park and not lock my car. Like, we lived in such a small, like, trusted community.
Country things.
Yeah, like, you just didn't lock your house at night. You didn't lock your car. Like, it was just sort of like, there's no one around and everyone's, like, a good Midwestern trusted person, which, I don't know. I don't live like that now, but that's what I grew up in. And, yeah, moving to, like, what was a city for me at the time, Ames, Iowa, in college, and, like, yeah, like, you get training on, like, what to do, like, making sure that you have friends with you, making sure, you know, you have a phone on you and you can call, like, campus security or campus police if you need a ride, that sort of thing, and sort of realizing, like, oh, this happens, like, on a regular basis to a lot of women, and it's very serious. So, and then on top of that, there's all sorts of, like, additional things, like, that the church puts on regarding, like, what clothes you wear and, like, what you may or may not be asking for and that sort of stuff that instilled a lot of fear in me moving into adulthood.
Yeah. I mean, and there's so much that I'm remembering right now. Like, when I went to Girl Scout camp, we learned self-defense at Girl Scout camp.
Yes.
And, like, the Boy Scouts were not learning that. And if they learned how to fight, it was, like, to fight. It wasn't, like, to defend yourself if someone attacks you.
Yeah.
That was not the frame that boys would learn those types of things.
Interesting.
And there's so much of the, like, double standard, which you see in the church all the time, the double standard of how a woman needs to prevent men, essentially, from assaulting them. Like, that's even in, like, non-religious groups as well, where it was, like, in my mind, I didn't register, like, oh, I'm being treated differently at Girl Scout camp because I'm a girl, and so we have to learn self-defense. It was like, oh, this is fun. We're, like, learning self-defense. This is cool. But looking back, it's like, oh, this is because they're aware that, like, that women either need to or are told that they need to, like, be prepared and be fearful.
Totally.
And, I mean, I feel like so many guys have no frame of reference for this at all, or, like, don't realize that women think about this so much.
Yeah.
Like, even thinking about your story with that guy putting his hand on your leg, he may have thought of that as so harmless, but that's something that made you sob for like hours. Yeah. Or I think about one of my close friends in college, he, like, found out from just, like, a couple of us girls talking that, like, we got catcalled all the time, and he was like, what? You, like, totally thought that was not a thing. Like, totally thought that seeing a woman get catcalled was something that just happened, like, in a movie, or that just happened maybe, like, if a girl was out and she was very scantily dressed. But we were, like, a group of modest Christian girls, and we're like, we get catcalled every day when we're walking to class, when we're just going about our business. And he was, like, rocked by that. And so I feel like so much guys are, like, totally oblivious to this.
Yeah.
But also perpetuate it in being oblivious.
No, totally. I think there's, like, a lack of awareness of the, I don't know, like, when people don't recognize their power, I guess. Like, they kind of bulldoze over people without even realizing that they're, like, considered a threat.
Yeah.
And catcalling can seem like an innocent thing.
It's like, oh, I'm just complimenting you.
Yeah, and it can be an innocent thing, but when it's done out of ignorance for what it could mean and, like, the implications of what that could mean, it's, like, it's very heady and very serious.
Yeah.
Or heavy, I should say. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I even saw a TikTok the other day. This girl was walking through New York City and she like started recording on TikTok because this guy was following her in his car. And he kept yelling out the window, like catcalling her and complimenting her. And she like yells back at him in TikTok. She goes, I appreciate the compliment, but stop following me. She's like, I don't want to interact with you. Please leave. And he kept being like, oh, but what's the harm? And blah, blah, blah. And she's like, get out. Like, she's like yelling and probably partially chose to pull up TikTok and record as a way of like, trying to be safe, trying to be like, look, I'm recording you right now doing this. And it was like a funny TikTok because she's like a comedian, but it was also like, this is very real. And this is like so many, like guys will think, oh, this is so harmless. But women are like, no, this is like, this could be life or death for me, which sounds extreme, but like,
that's the reality.
And it does feel that way. It feels like, okay, if I look at you the wrong way, if I'm polite to you, you might think of that as leading you on. If I'm rude to you, you might take that as a trigger and become aggressive. If I don't acknowledge you, you could like amp up your attempt to get my attention and make the situation worse. It feels like it's a total trap.
Yeah, you can't win. It's gonna happen like no matter what. And that's it's interesting that you had that self-defense experience because I actually did a few years of self-defense. And we actually had Mr. Jack. I loved Mr. Jack. He was an ex-cop, and we had co-ed classes, and he would like brush on things, but make it general and be like, "Hey, if you get bad vibes from someone, trust that and look at them in the eye and smile and say hi." Like he taught us like those things, but he made it for both boys and girls, which I appreciated. But there definitely was a level of like, I'm putting this in here because I have a lot of very young, beautiful girls in my class. And he knew after years in law enforcement, the psychology of that, of like, hey, when someone feels seen, they don't feel like they can actually pull something off. And that's something that has stuck with me. So now when I get catcalled, like I will look at them, be like, hey, like I see you. Like don't try to pull something. Like, I'm also the person that I won't hesitate to call the cops. I've called the cops on many people just because there is that level of, I mean, the way I grew up was, like, it blows my mind that some people don't lock their cars. Or it blows my mind that some people don't lock their doors. Like, our door was always locked, whether we were right by it or not. And that's just how we lived life. So, yeah, I don't really, like, mess around.
No, that's good. And I think like piggybacking off of self-defense classes and like kind of your strategies, what are some of the everyday precautions that you guys take in your life?
I mean, I feel like, so I touched on this a little bit already, but it's like, it is the like calling somebody so that you know that like someone is on the phone with me and can know if I die, basically, or know if I get kidnapped. Or staying in well-lit areas at night, or having your keys between your fingers. I've done that. But also, like, just not looking vulnerable, essentially. Like, figuring out how to walk with purpose and walk like you know where you're going and have a facial expression that tells people not to mess with you and those sorts of things. But also just not going places alone sometimes is like the best option or the easiest option in terms of like feeling safe. There's so many times, especially when I was living in Philadelphia, where I would be like, I like would beg my roommates to like walk with me somewhere because I needed to go somewhere, but I didn't feel comfortable going alone. And that's like very real. And like, I feel like there's tropes that people like sort of tease women for like always like being together and in like a group, like, and that kind of thing, or even like going to the bathroom together and that type of thing. And it's like, well, actually, like, some of that is just safety, and it's kind of been ingrained in us, and we don't even think about it that much. But think about going to the bathroom is a very vulnerable situation. It can be. And if a man followed you into the bathroom, what are you going to do? Like, how are you going to defend yourself if you're like, God forbid, like crammed into a stall or something? And that you can't really do anything.
Yeah.
And
no one's
so,
going to hear you, like, if you're alone. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so I think that things like that are like rooted in trying to stay safe. And I feel like so much of it too is just we do it automatically. Like we don't even think about it.
It's truly like overwhelming. Like you said, like so many things are rooted in safety that have become like tropes. But like I actually, when I'm on my way home from somewhere, I will always call my husband and let him know, like, hey, I'll be home in about 10 minutes. I keep a baseball bat in my car. I keep a baseball bat by my bed. I have a taser that I carry with me at all times. I have pepper spray on my keychain. I have looked into getting my CCW. I look people in the eye when I walk past them, especially people that make me uncomfortable. Not only because, one, I want them to know I see them and I'm aware of them, but also I don't want to look away from people that make me uncomfortable, like from a humanity standpoint. But those are all things I do. I'm very active about my safety, but I also think I have another layer most people don't have, which is I actually have a very mentally ill relative who has on many occasions vocalized wanting to cause me and my family harm. And so that is another layer of something that it's like I'm always aware of that. And something that, you know, like we're all kind of ingrained in. So it's like, oh, if this person were to show up and like, no question, like I am instantly going to need to defend myself and, you know, call law enforcement. So it's just kind of like layer after layer after layer for me personally as a person. Because for me, where I'm from and where I was raised, like threats are very real. And so now I am a very aware person, always aware of my surroundings. And I'm also an introvert, so I don't go out a lot. So that's not really something I like worry about or do. But, you know, I would bring friends if I'm out doing something. Like I don't just like wander around by myself.
Yeah, that's one thing. Like, I just don't, like, to me, going outside alone at night is just a non-option. Like, I mean, I can drive, like, somewhere public and go grocery shopping or whatever. I'm not, like, that extreme, but, like
to park your car downtown.
Yeah, if it came to, parking my car downtown or taking a walk or, like, even if I had a dog, walking the dog, like, to me, that's just not, it's not an option.
I mean, even, I'll say the other day, we were leaving your house, Kelly, and you went to go check your mail, and I felt worried about you. And it was nighttime. It was like, 9 or 10 p.m.?
And you're literally like a few houses down from your house.
To go to, like, the group mailbox that your block shares. And I, like... Yeah, like one of my first thoughts was like, oh, I gotta like make sure that Kelly's still there when I drive back up the street, you know? Which is like, it's a very safe neighborhood that you live in. And like,
very quiet.
I've walked in that neighborhood in the middle of the night by myself.
It gets dark,
it's
though.
Scary.
Yeah, it is scary.
And like, you think as you're walking around at night, it's like, you're constantly wondering if something's going to happen.
Yeah.
Like, you're constantly thinking, like, around that corner, behind that bush.
Yeah.
Like, there could be a man there waiting.
Yeah.
And I've never, I mean, thank goodness, never had an experience like that.
Yeah.
Like, I've been very, like, blessed or protected or whatever. Like, I haven't been in a circumstance where I've had to defend myself. But, like, that's still a constant thought.
Yeah. And I want to touch on, though, something I feel like we're alluding to, and that is, like, the band of, like, sisterhood almost that is formed. Like, I'm going to walk you to your door, or I'm going to watch you go to your mailbox, or I'm going to go with you to the bathroom. And there is, like, this level of, like, we are kind of, like, all connected and constantly looking out for each other because we know. I mean, there was a few months ago, I thought I heard a scream outside, like a woman scream. I don't know if it was a TV from next door. I don't know if it was a video game my husband was playing or what, but I instantly stopped what I was doing, grabbed a baseball bat, and ran outside because I was like, if there's something happening to a woman and I can do something about it, I will. Looked around, couldn't find a woman. Could have been a TV show. Have no idea. But I would rather, like, do something that could be perceived as, like, illogical than risk like something could be happening and I didn't do something. And I think there is that level. Like, we're all constantly kind of looking out for each other.
Yeah. Another thought I just had too is like with international travel, there's like for sure a limitation in certain areas of where women can go and where they can't go.
Yeah.
And I definitely have felt that group covering is essential in a lot of traveling places, especially when you're traveling to more developing nations and things like that. There's just like, well, first of all, being white and American, and then walking around like being alone is just not even
It's not an option.
Not an option.
Yeah. I mean, I experienced that a lot while I was like doing mission work abroad. Like there were places where the locals would tell us, do not walk around by yourself as a woman. Or sometimes it was even, do not walk around as a group of women. You must have a man with you because this is not safe. I was in some of the highest crime rate areas of the countries I was in. And it was like, you felt so trapped. And I want to touch on too with the international point is that there's so many women internationally that live with a lot more fear than we have to experience as American women. I mean, the most recent example that I can think of, obviously, is the Taliban in Afghanistan. Like, women are hiding. Women are not on the streets at all because there's so much fear. And they've been told, you should probably stay indoors for your own safety because the Taliban military doesn't know how to respect women. And it's like, well, how did they get to that point where they don't know? Like they act like, oh, they just don't know. So you have to stay inside. Like, why is that on these women? And like these women are having to now cover themselves up more as a safety precaution, which it is, to caveat, totally fine if a woman wants to wear a hijab or a burqa or whatever for their own like religious practice. But to have to do that in order to protect themselves from men is ridiculous and it's oppressive, and they're implementing segregated schools where women are not going to be able to get the same amount of education as men, and segregated workplaces. And
I think they just recently banned secondary education for women in general.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I mean, but I feel like
we should fact check that. Everyone fact check that.
Yes, but I think like even a step further, like women that have been teaching girls, like female teachers that have been giving girls educations, are now like their lives are like being threatened. Like they are also in hiding, not just because they're women, but because they dared to educate women, which is like mind-blowing.
Yeah. And so all that to say, like, we do have fears, like, as women in the United States that are very real and that I think are founded in many ways, but there's a lot more like extreme and scary and life-threatening situations that other women are in all over the world, where women don't have nearly as many rights as we do. And I just think it's important for us to note that.
Yeah.
No, that's super important. And just like the reminder as well that the discussion of women and why women are afraid for sure is way beyond these walls of our studio. Like we have, we live in a generally conservative town. I mean, that is generally sort of safe. I mean, it's California, so it's like, as safe as it can get. But, there is, like, this is a global issue, not just a local concern. Yeah. But I think of that, and there are obviously kind of the extreme threats of things. I think of before I started traveling internationally, I was given like a high threat security training, and we like learned how to like get out of zip ties and like what to do if someone points a gun at us. Like it was like super intense, and there's sort of like that kind of perceived threat that's very, very real, but also especially in our like domestic situation, not exactly like normal. And then there's a second layer of it where threats come, especially when it comes to sexual assault in our own homes, with our own friend groups, and among people that we know and trust. I think there's like a high percentage of sexual assault that is from someone you know.
I think it might be most.
I think it's around like 80%.
80 or 90%.
It's like staggeringly high.
And I guess I'm curious, like how did or did your parents or authority figures in your life teach you to manage those threats? Or or did they at all? You know, like, because I think I grew up with a very keen understanding of like the rarity, but like the more extreme type of threat, but wasn't necessarily like equipped to handle the near and dear, close to me threat. Like your self-defense class, for example, isn't going to serve you when your uncle is, you know, making advances on you.
No, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was not taught at all. There was one individual that is family who I noted earlier who is very unsafe. And we were taught that at a very young age, but it was because this person is unstable and like literally crazy. But it was like, your friends are safe. The people around you are safe. It's everyone else that you need to worry about. But I mean, truth be told, the most uncomfortable situations I've ever been in have been with either relatives or close friends, people I was raised with. And I mean, I got permission to share this story, P.S., but someone very close to me that I love very dearly recently was sexually assaulted just now, I think 4 or 5 weeks ago. And it's from someone she knew. And that's a reality that I don't think is touched on enough. There's I don't even know what to say after that. It's just you need to be aware of the dynamics in your relationships, and we need to be teaching that. That needs to be something at the forefront of how do you address something when like this person I know who is close to me treats me in a way that makes me very uncomfortable, and they don't respond well potentially when I say, hey, this is uncomfortable. It's like, well, you trust me, don't you? It's like, it's not about trust. It's about you are making me uncomfortable right now and you need to stop.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like I don't remember ever learning from my family about how to prevent somebody from doing something inappropriate or anything like that. I mean, there was the obvious like outsiders of saying like, well, like don't go off with strangers or whatever, but not of like safety within your family. And I mean, I come from a very like female heavy family with lots of aunts and sisters and stuff, and so it felt very like I guess maybe unnecessary almost probably to a lot of family members. But we did have like a relative who did things that were sexually inappropriate with like one of my other relatives, and like that happened multiple times before anybody said anything. Like they swept it under the rug, and like people knew that this was happening with in multiple instances with different people, and didn't do anything about it until it had happened multiple times. And so I feel like there's this idea, if you are in like family, that like you need to just preserve your family, rather than bring up something that's actually genuinely like harmful. It's like, oh, we don't want to like break up the family or have some sort of family crisis or things like that. But that's not helpful. Like think about the people that were impacted by that. And I think that that's a culture that we have around sexual assault and rape in general as a society is, I'll just like sweep it under the rug. We'll just move past. Like, can't we just move on? And it's like, well, when something has happened, when an act has been committed, you don't just move on. You don't just get over it. Like you have to go through that and deal with the consequences on both sides. Victim and perpetrator have to deal with consequences. And then if the perpetrator doesn't receive any consequences, the victim still has consequences. There's still trauma. There's still pain. And the perpetrator gets to just walk around free. And that's not healthy.
Well, and hearkening back to my story earlier, the young man who, I don't know if you could who solicited my affections, I guess you could say, he had been harassing the young women in the church for months, if not longer. And probably due to his mental disability and developmental delays, the church leadership never saw that it was an issue that needed to be addressed. They felt that it was harmless. They felt that it didn't need to be addressed. I know my friend, she complained several times, like, hey, he's like not making me feel safe. This is not okay. Yep. And they would just be like, oh, well, everyone's welcome here at church, so he can be here. And it wasn't until that happened to me and they realized, oh, this 12-year-old girl just got like hit on by an 18-year-old in a very inappropriate way. Maybe he's not safe to be around young girls anymore. And that was never something I was prepared for. Like, I wasn't going to use my karate chop self-defense on this guy, right? Like, it wasn't like he jumped me out of a bush in the dark of night, you know? He was just in my church, which is supposed to be a safe place. And I even think of my brother when he was very angry growing up. And I remember one time, like, he was cutting up some cheese, I think. Like, he was making dinner. And he loves to cook. And I went and, like, stole a piece of cheese, like you do. Like, who doesn't? And he, like, turned around and got very angry at me and actually grabbed me and, like, pushed me up against a wall and yelled at me and said, never do that again. And so he, like, physically assaulted me. And that was never – I didn't have any tools to, like, report that or call that out or say, like, that's not okay, because it was just like, oh, it's just brotherly, sisterly – abuse, or not abuse, but like, you know, disagreements, tussles. But we didn't know how to recognize abuse in our own four walls.
Absolutely. I mean, I had a very similar situation, and I haven't talked a lot on the podcast about my relationship with my dad for a lot of reasons, but we do not have a good relationship, and I've had that happen with me from him, and you're not taught. It's like, oh, it's disciplinary, or, you know, I'm the parent, so I get to do what I see fit. But it's not okay, and it never should be okay. And for me, like, I became the person that I'm like, I'm okay making a scene right now because you know what? You should be ashamed. Like, you cannot grab me that way. And, you know, I think that is something that is discouraged for young girls. It's like, oh, don't make a scene. Don't, you know, cause a disturbance or whatever. But
don't be dramatic.
Don't be dramatic. Don't take it so seriously. But when something like that is happening, I'm like, absolutely make a scene, girl. You scream at the top of your lungs, don't touch me. And that is perfectly acceptable, especially if someone is, you know, like, not listening. Like, that's actually something in the situation that I talked about earlier. I went to James. I was like, hey, you got to tell this guy to stop following me and taking pictures. Like, I understand, like, that's not fair for me to have to ask of you, but he is not listening to me. I then went to the person running the event that we were working, and I was like, hey, I cannot be scheduled with this person. Like, and it's just, when boundaries aren't respected, you've got to take it to the next level. And people need to be taught that, because it is very easy to freeze. I have frozen. I think that's a perfectly acceptable thing to happen. But if women and young girls are given more tools to handle them, maybe the outcomes will be different.
Yeah, like, it's almost like we're kind of taught, and I'm not trying to discount any of the things that we've just discussed, because they're all very real things, and I think it's amazing that women take practical precautions in their life. But it's almost as if we're taught to defend ourselves from this sort of invisible, evil enemy that is sort of like on the outskirts. We're not prepared for the enemy within. And we're instead, like, given sort of tropes or, like, scripts of, you know, woman grabbed and kidnapped and dead 3 days later, as opposed to, like, woman, cousin, sexual assault happened, and or young boy pastor sexual assault happened, or young girl, whatever. Like we don't talk about those things, and we don't prepare them. And I don't know, I guess that's my next question is like, as we consider the things that we fear, can you recognize any like outside fears that are potentially a little irrational that you've lived with? And maybe inside fears that you haven't been told to be afraid of or learned to be afraid of, or have learned the hard way to be afraid of, I guess. So an example being, I think this is like stems all the way back to Birth of a Nation. There has been a trope that I've been taught that of white women being raped by Black men. And so that's sort of up until like adulthood, when I started to deconstruct kind of my conservative upbringing, I didn't really realize that was just something I had been told could happen and therefore was something I should be afraid of, but didn't actually have any reasoning for that to ever happen to me. I didn't know any Black men really in my life, or if the ones I did, I was not very connected with. And like interracial rape is very rare. Like there's all sorts of like statistics around that and why that is not a very common thing to happen. And we've actually seen historically, like, so many whistles being blown that were actually false accusations that have put Black men in jail for their lifetimes.
Or cost them their lives.
And so that is an example of like an ethereal outside threat that I grew up with, but like isn't actually something I need to perceive as, you know, my most threatening threat, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've definitely heard that trope. I did not experience it necessarily because, again, I grew up in a very diverse neighborhood and it was just like men rape women, the end. But I've seen that acted out a lot, especially in other circles I kind of ran in growing up. But I think, one that is not taught is that you need to be aware of all family members, not just. Also, there's the reality that, you know, boys are abused as well. That's not something that I think is talked enough about. As well as abuse can happen from someone of the same gender. That is something that also needs to be talked about. I do think there is a level of people taking things to an extreme. I definitely know I am on the more extreme end of the spectrum of the safety woman situation, but I'm also, you know, it's what makes me feel safe, frankly, and comfortable. And I think if you need more than you actually need, it's okay to take that. And I think I'm rambling because I forgot the question.
Yeah, I mean, I think like maybe to rephrase in a simpler way is like, what are some of our irrational fears and what are the rational ones? And how do we even differentiate between what's rational and irrational?
Yeah.
Like me being raped by a Black man is in general a very irrational fear. Like I do not have any close relatives who are Black. Like the odds of me being jumped out of a bush in the darkness by a Black man are very low, you know, and thankfully kind of moving into adulthood, that's sort of something I've deconstructed. But in the deconstruction of that, I've been like, wait, what other things have I just been afraid of?
Yeah.
And I've just taken people's word for it. But the actual threat was somewhere else.
Yeah. I think, too, another thing that's irrational is the fear of the unhoused. Granted, there is a high rate of mental illness. Generally speaking, I know that is not everyone, and also of drug abuse, but also like there was definitely a very large fear of that. Like, oh, if someone who is homeless approaches me, something terrible is going to happen. And like, that is not true. And so
I share that.
Yeah, that is something that I think I was taught. I mean, again, come from an area where there's a lot of people that are unhoused. And so that's something we experience daily. And granted, there are some moments that it's like, oh, this isn't an appropriate interaction and you need to know better. Like when, my mom is in the church parking lot downtown unloading her 4 children under the age of 12 out of a car, and a homeless man approaches her and is asking her for help. It's like, I am with my 4 children. Like, this is very uncomfortable. Like, I will give you a card to the rescue mission. Like, but please leave. Like moments like that. But I think there's a deep fear for some reason of the vulnerable, minority communities. But really, you need to be more aware of those that are, work normal jobs, make good salaries. They're people that appear, quote unquote, normal, that live apparently happy lives from the outside, that are an equal threat.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you brought that up, like the fact that it's people who are actually vulnerable. Like in these situations, like if they happened to us, we would typically actually be the more like societally powerful person. Mm-hmm. Like as a white person, if someone who is a person of color were to come up to you, like still typically your word would be believed over theirs. Mm-hmm. And you would be in a position of higher power. And somebody who is unhoused and who is maybe mentally vulnerable or whatever, like you are a person in power because you have like financial wealth and because you are privileged in that way. And I think that we have so much like fear of other mm-hmm. that we like start to like fantasize these scenarios with people that feel scary to us mm-hmm. because they're other, and then they turn into dangerous to us. Mm-hmm. When really like those are probably the people that we should be like reaching out towards the most. And I think that has a lot to do with just like the way that our Western society has been built in general, is to other people and call them dangerous, call them scary, call them unclean, call them unpredictable or whatever. And then they're able to be pushed to the margins while we can succeed, really. Mm-hmm. And I mean, and women receive that as well. Like so many preachers have said that a woman preaching is dangerous, as if that is going to be in some way like a risk to your life that a woman would preach, or that it's going to take away your salvation or something and be sinful somehow. But also the idea of like the dangerous woman of the night who's going to seduce like helpless men who just can't resist her seductress ways or whatever. Mm-hmm. Like there's that trope that's been put onto us as well, but then we also receive that for people who are quote unquote lower in society than us. Mm-hmm. And when really what you see much more often in people who are sexually assaulting people who are like committing these acts that we're told to be fearful of, are the people who are above us in the power structure. So they're mm-hmm. the white men. They're the frat boys at the parties. They're the pastors. Mm-hmm. They're the politicians.
Bosses.
They're the bosses. It's those people, because people generally are not going to commit and act like that to someone who is above them in a power dynamic, mm-hmm. because that's then putting them at further risk of mm-hmm. oppression, really. Yeah. Whereas someone who is already at an advantage is going to go down the totem pole, or whatever you want to call mm-hmm. it, down the power structure and take advantage of it. Yeah.
Well, and that's actually very true of rape as a whole, is that it's actually not a crime that psychologically is based on lust or mm-hmm. like passion or sexual animalistic uncontrollable behavior. It's actually power dynamics. It's actually always or almost always perpetrated by someone who is in power and uses that power to overpower somebody else.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so those people who are on the outskirts of society, the unhoused, minorities, they are at the greatest risk of having crimes committed against them.
Yeah. They're not the ones committing the crimes.
Or they
in the
are
same way.
among each other, potentially. Because poverty does, unfortunately, come with a lot of those communities. And in poverty, crime usually is quite high. So, but it should be seen more as a correlation and not
Causation.
an official, a statement of someone's intention.
I think also something that I think we see a lot in our society is fear of those that are not at the same mental functioning capacity as you. So like I worked a lot with kids and young adults with mental and physical development challenges. And there's one student that I worked with in particular, I forget his name, but he was very big and very tall. I think he had about the mental capacity of about a 4-year-old. He was very severely autistic, amongst a few other things, and he was a very great student. But I think just understanding how people work within that community, like he was a great student until he got really frustrated, and one time he actually hit me in the boob, not intentionally. It was just what was by his hand. And that's really scary. And I understand that is, and I was very scared, but also like realizing like, oh, actually I need to interact with you differently so that you don't get frustrated because you process your emotions differently than me. I think there can be a lot more education around that because, things like schizophrenia, that is labeled as a very dangerous mental health issue. But actually, the majority of people that suffer from schizophrenia are not physically violent. And I think that is an area that there can be a lot more education around because we've kind of been taught that if you are not, quote unquote, mentally stable, fully developed, whatever, that you're dangerous, and it's simply not true. There are a portion of people, yes, that will be dangerous, like my relative I mentioned earlier, but the majority of people are not. He is the extreme and the majority, not the majority, minority of that group of people.
Yeah, and I think back over my adolescence and even a lot of my young adulthood, even now, and I think like so much of my energy was actually put towards the fear of wearing the wrong thing and causing someone to like become aroused. Like honestly.
Yeah.
That like and I think on my parents' part, on the part of my church, it was all an effort to keep me safe. But I think I look back and I wonder if that was really effective in keeping me safe from anything other than like the most extreme rare cases. And it didn't actually prepare me for the real world. Like, I was afraid of wearing a shirt too low, not of like knowing how to handle myself when, someone made sexual advances toward me that I knew.
As if someone were intending to assault you, having a high neckline would prevent them.
Yeah.
Like that's...
Oh, wait, I'm wearing a turtleneck.
Yeah.
No.
That's ridiculous when you think about that because, I mean, just like we've already touched on, it's not about lust or whatever. Like, it's about power dynamics and it's about somebody trying to feel powerful. And so that's when assault happens, not because a girl is dressed anyway.
Yeah.
And so I guess, like, to wrap this up, because this has been a great conversation, as women, how do we move forward? Because I think we've talked about two very different extremes. On one hand, the very real threat. I think that there's some, like, astounding, staggering statistics that will tell women that we have very real reasons to be afraid. On the other hand, there are things that we've been told to be afraid of when in actuality we don't necessarily, especially as white women, have a reason to be the person in a position of fear. And so how do we balance those? How do we move forward in a way that is healthy for our own selves? Because, we have to live our lives and not be anxious, fearful creatures, but we also have to be wise and take precaution, but we also have to extend compassion and understanding towards those less privileged than us.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned statistics. I have a few that I prepared that I'd love to read out.
Fancy lady.
I am all about the data, guys. So like you said, so this is from the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. There's also another great website called rain.com, which stands for a bunch of impressive letters.
It's like RAINN, right?
Yeah, it's like INN. So real quickly, 1 in 5 women in the United States experience completed or attempted rape during their lifetime. Nearly a quarter of the men in the U.S. also experience some kind of contact of sexual violence in their lifetime. Nationwide, around 81% of women report experiencing some form of sexual harassment and/or assault in their lifetime. 1 in 3 female victims of completed or attempted rape experience it from the first time between the ages of 11 and 17. So here's the deal, guys. It's education for kids, in my opinion. But around half of female victims of rape report being raped by an intimate partner and 40% by an acquaintance. So those are a few rough statistics. I think I saw that the cost of rape, quote unquote, so like any legal fees, counseling, therapy, tests also is over $100,000 on average. So it's something that it's like, yes, you should be afraid at some level. Mm-hmm. But also, like you said, like you can't actually this is something I've been processing recently. Mm-hmm. You actually can't deal with something until it happens. Mm-hmm. So yes, be wise, be preventative, take preventative measures, but also like you can't walk around like something has happened to you that has not yet happened. And in the situation I talked about earlier with someone very close to me whom I love dearly, that is the question. It is, okay, now what? Now what do we do? How do we move forward? And I think our society needs to address this problem. There is a problem that even if you say no, I can take what I want. And that is completely unacceptable. There's a lack of education, and it's still very stigmatized. And I think this is fueled by the church a lot of ways. It is this idea of idealizing virginity to the point that if something were to happen to you, you now are so deeply affected by that your life course is altered. And that is simply not true as well. You are strong. You are capable. You are a self-healing machine. And yes, you will have to do so much work because of that. And like for that, I am like sorry for any survivor, not a victim. You are a survivor. But we need to also be educating men. That's the reality.
Yeah, I love that you brought up education. I think that's really, really important because the thing is at the end of the day, like moving forward, unfortunately, this is not something that you can just change overnight. Mm-hmm. And I think that we need to like educate ourselves around like harmful tropes that we have been taught, like we already talked about, things that just simply aren't true and that are rooted in racism or classism or whatever, sexism, to add another ism in there for you. But we need to be conscious of those things and deconstruct those things, and also be conscious of not passing those things along to the next generations, because this is something that's grown over generations and is going to have to be broken down over generations as well. And I think that like the biggest issue is that like our Western society sees women as second-class citizens still. There's still so much where women are not treated with equality and women are not seen as worth equality. And so because of that, it's not just that like we need to like take preventative measures and like try to be safer and just sort of suck it up. This is the way that life is for a woman. Like, yeah, in some ways we do need to do that. And we're like, this is the way it is. But like the fact that it's normal like to rape someone, to sexually assault someone, to devalue women, like that's why women have to take precautions. It's not because we're like making up a ton of crazy fantasies. Like I feel like most women either know somebody or know somebody who knows somebody who's been raped or sexually assaulted.
Or they themselves have experienced it. Yeah.
Like there are very few degrees of separation in that. Ever. And men have the same thing, but they don't hear about it from women. And really, to me, the only way to move forward is to educate people, to advocate for women, to like shift old, archaic, patriarchal viewpoints that have said that women are XYZ, and instead viewing us as people, because it is about power. It is about systems that have been in place for years and years and years. And so unfortunately, like to me, moving forward is taking another inch of a step towards progress. And that's like why things like feminism are still important. Like that's why it's important to be educating children about sex and about how to give consent. And that's not going to over-sexualize children. It's going to prepare children and it's going to educate them and equip them. And unfortunately, we have to be equipped. Like, I wish we lived in a world where we didn't have to be equipped to prevent people from hurting us, but we do. And we can work towards a more perfect society, but that's not something that I could see us achieving in the near future. So we just have to look out for each other.
We do. And I think the realization, even though it's not fair, it's going to take time. Just like gay marriage took time. Yeah. Just like people, addressing the deep-rooted issues of racism in our country, just like the pay gap, just like the first wave feminist movement. Unfortunately, this is the way society works. You have to work from the ground up and the top down, and you have to have patience and persistence. It will take time, but in our daughters' lives, or our daughters' times, or our granddaughters, or our great-granddaughters, change will happen, and it can be possible. It just takes
and it has
pushing
happened.
for that.
We've seen progress. Like,
we've seen
progress
tons of progress.
But it's, there's still more.
Yeah, all good thoughts. I think the only thing I would add on to that is for anyone who's tempted to make fun of the angry feminist trope, there's a reason she's angry. I think all the things we just discussed, like, there's a lot of reasons to be angry. And I think for me, it is learning to recognize the things that make me angry for valid reasons and kind of get rid of the things that I've just been told to be afraid of. And in a sense, the things I've been told to be afraid of that have sort of been put in place to keep me in my place. And I think I hope for a future where I can teach my daughters to protect themselves in real practical ways, but also not burden them with my own fears or with church traditional roles or things like that. It'll take some time. But for anyone who's asking the question, why are women afraid? Or why are feminists so angry? Or what are these women complaining about anyways? This is what we're complaining about. And it's super legitimate. And oftentimes the solutions that we've been given have actually not been tools to deal with the actual threats that we face every day. So,
no. And I mean, like, on the one hand, I think about, like, solutions with that. Like, the solution being, like, oh, we'll just go out with a man instead. or just go with a group of women instead, because going alone is not safe, but a man could go somewhere alone safely. Like, that is like visual, like, evidence of a lack of equality, that a man could feel confident going out somewhere alone at night and a woman cannot. Like, that is not, like, we have those precautions in place for a reason, but at the same time, they're evidence of a power differential. And like, that's how you see it.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like people ask, like, why are you still upset about, like, you have so many things that women have gained. Women have made leaps and bounds in progress and in equality, but it's like, there's still this.
There's still very serious vulnerabilities.
Yeah, even women, like, if you think about the Me Too movement, like, women who are seen as successful and powerful and who are models for other women across, like, the world, women who have tons of power, wealth, and success still are being subjected to this. Like, that, to me, that shows that this is an issue that is, like, sex-based specifically. Like, this is about women and men. And not, it doesn't, it goes across, like, class and race and all of that.
Yeah. And so, woman beings, we send you off with all of the love. Stay safe. Please continue to travel in groups and, hold keys between your fingers and all of those things. We can still hope and work towards a safer world. But for now, safety first, progress second. And
yeah, I mean, don't be naive for the sake of being a feminist, you know, like, I feel like I might have the tendency towards that of being like, well, I'm just going to go do this because I should be able to. And, that's not necessarily, like, the safest thing to do in every situation. Like, I'm still, like, I mean, maybe if I was, like, a professional kickboxer or something, I'd feel okay doing that and say, well, screw this, I'm just going to do it. But I'm not. I'm very weak. But, like, that, I think there's a balance in that of, like, I don't want to seem, like, crazy or, like, I'm over-cautious, but also, like, we do need to be cautious. There is validity to that.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for sharing today. This has been a great conversation. And I appreciate you guys sharing your experiences and also your thoughts about this issue, because it's very layered and it has lots of nuance. And
so much.
I'm sure, people who aren't women, people, the non-binary, the trans community, the LGBTQ community in general, they experience this on a whole different level than we do. But yeah, for anyone that is listening, this is just a taste of what women, at least the cisgender straight
white
women that are white, experience and feel and have grown up with. So, thanks for tuning in. You can follow us on Instagram at Woman Being Podcast, or check out our website at Woman Being Community. Our podcast is on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and pretty much anywhere you can find a podcast that there is. We're also now, Emma, you could say it.
I was going to say, we're now on Amazon Music as well, which is very exciting. So I believe with that, you can listen to us on Amazon Music or on Audible. So
there you go.
Yeah.
We just expanded.
Give us a little review on there if you want.
Give us a review anywhere. We really appreciate your interaction. Like our post, comment, DM us. We just love to hear what you're thinking and feeling and experiencing, and want to keep the conversation going. So all that being said, we'll see you next time. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.